everybody, it's Dana and welcome back to day 3 of the holiday card series. Who is ready for a gorgeous color palette? All right, let's get into the card. Today we're going to be using products from Altenew, and we have these gorgeous pinks and purples. These colors blend so beautifully together, and we're going to be doing a little bit of stenciling today. So we are going to be using the Altenew Shattered Cubes. This is a buildable stencil. There is a design on the back. So you have stencil number 1 and stencil number 2, and you can create all of these designs. I'm going to show you 2 ways to use the stencils today. I'm actually not going to be combining them. So we're going to start with stencil number 2, and we're going to do the design right there in that top corner. Again, you can use both stencils together, and I'll link to a card that I did a couple of weeks ago sharing how that card looks. Like I said, I'm going to be using stencil number 2. That's the one right there on the bottom, and that's going to create our first design. I did bring in my waffle flower mat, and this is going to help me keep that stencil tucked in the corner. And then I just have a piece of white cardstock. I believe this is Neenah Solar White 80 pound. And I'm placing that exactly where I want it behind the stencil. It doesn't have to be tucked in the corner because I'm going to use some purple tape to hold that in place. But each time I line up my stencil is going to be in the correct place. Now, I did speed this up because I'm not doing anything special here. I'm just adding in my first color. Again, it doesn't make a difference what color you want to start with. I just decided to start with my pinks, but you can also start with your purples. Again, you can use any of the color palettes that we're showing between Christina and I. You can use any of those 10 color palettes to use this stencil and just make a different card in a different color. So now, since I'm finished with that first layer, I'm going to clean off my stencil. And then I can rotate that stencil. I'm going to rotate that stencil 45 degrees. So you see, I just make one quick little turn. And then I can come in with my next color. This is going to be one shade darker in that pink elevation. So I started with the lighter of the pinks, and now I'm coming in with the darker of the pinks. If you didn't notice when I pulled up the color palette, there's 2 shades of pinks and 2 shades of purple. That's going to allow me to have that different color range between my pinks and my purples. So you can see right there, there's 2 different shades that work very well together. Again, I'm going to clean off that stencil, rotate it one more time. Now, I do want to say this mat that I'm using will stain. Now, if that bothers you, I would suggest maybe you put down a piece of paper behind it. To me, it doesn't make a difference to me because to me, this is what this mat is for. Some of the colors with this mat, especially reds and pinks, will stain your mat. So just keep that in mind. If it doesn't bother you, just keep moving forward. For me, it doesn't bother me at all because it just means I was creating that day. Now I have that third color down. I can swing around that stencil and you can see that our design is coming together. Everything is just linked. When you turn your stencil just 45-degree turns, you'll end up to have a beautiful design. That's what I love about this stencil. I love the design aspect of this. Now I'll go in and finish in with that darkest of my purples. And then when I remove this stencil, I have a gorgeous design. Now there is a lot of white space on here. So if you love white space, use only stencil number 2. And that's going to give you a lot of that white space. Now, if you want less white space, I'm going to show you how to use number 1 stencil. So I can go ahead and set this aside. I'm going to clean up everything, and then we're going to come back in with stencil number 1. So there, that's stencil number 1, and that's going to give me a totally different design than I had with stencil number 2. And the reason I decided to start with stencil number 2, I just wanted to show you how much white space you get. With stencil number 1, you're going to have a more of a tight design. And I love them both ways, but sometimes you just might want a less busier background. So using stencil number 2 is going to help you create that design. I'm doing the same exact thing, tucking my stencil in the corner, placing down my white cardstock behind it, taping that cardstock in place, and we're going again with stencil number 1. I'm putting down that first color of that pink. Now, you can, with the stencil, let me say this, you can combine both of the stencils. You can use stencil 1 and 2 together. That will give you a much detailed and layered look, and you can find that design on the back of the packaging. For my cards, I wanted to keep them separate. I just wanted to show you how you can use each stencil separately, but again, you can use them together. I just wanted to make sure I had enough pink. Again, I have to clean off that stencil. I'm going to rotate that stencil 45 degrees. And you can start seeing here where I'm starting to build up that design. The same way I built up the design using stencil number 2. So with each quarter of a turn with this stencil, that's how you're creating your design. I also believe if you only wanted to turn this 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, totally up to you. And you can also do it with the same color. You don't necessarily have to change up your colors. To me, changing up those colors allows me to have like that really big wow factor on my card. But if you wanted a card that was very muted with just one color palette, you can totally do that as well. I have layer 2 down. I'm going to go ahead and clean off that stencil, rotate it again. And remember, I'm just rotating this a quarter of a turn. And now here is layer number 3. So you can actually see through the stencil and you can see how this is building up upon itself. Having these kind of stencils where you can kind of mix and match and rotate allows you so many opportunities to make gorgeous color palettes. But again, like I said, keep in mind, if you only wanted to use 2 colors on this, you can do that as well. The card that I showed a couple weeks ago, I used 2 of the, or 3 colors. In that last color, I used Bliss Glitter Gel. So that last quarter of a turn, I decided to use sparkle gel, glitter gel on that. If you didn't want to use glitter gel, you could totally use embossing as well. So keep that in mind. It's kind of, you know, up to you on how you create the design, and there's so many different ways that you can do this. So just keep your opportunities and your mind open to really creating different kind of holiday cards using this stencil and any of the color palettes that we're sharing with you. Again, to get those color palettes, you can head on over to my blog. There will be a link below. And the color palette is off on my sidebar, or you can go to day 1 and you'll see the color palette in the link within that post. I'm just finishing up with the darkest of my purples, and you're totally going to see the difference of how this design looks compared to our first design. Once I have all that ink done, I can go ahead and remove the stencil. And when I remove this, you're totally going to see a different design. Look how filled this paper is. I love this stencil number 1. It just has my heart. So as you can see, my design is a lot tighter. I filled up a lot more of that paper compared to just using stencil number 2. So you can see I have a lot of white space on this one. And on this one here, I have a lot more color. So I think I want to use the one that has a lot more color for my card today. All right, now I want to have a pretty little ornament on that backdrop. So I'm coming in with another 80-pound piece of paper, and I'm doing the lovely ornaments. This stamp set is also from Altenew, and I do believe I have a card in a post from a couple of weeks ago, so I'll be sure to link that below as well, so you can see the color palette I used on that one. Now, I'm starting off with the largest or the more solid image, but I did somehow get a cut in my ornament. So I'm going to show you how you can hide that. So if anything like this happens and it's a solid image, I'm going to show you if there's a layering piece that goes on top of it, you can hide that little mark by overlaying something on top of it. And this stamp set is perfect for that because I'm going to have like some gold on this, and that's going to help me hide that little slash that I made in my stamp. I don't know how in the world I did it, you guys. I think I just must have been very happy one day and I had some scissors near me and it ended up cutting into my ornament. Now I have used this stamp set before, and I'm noticing when I get ready to stamp that my ink is not really holding on to my stamp because I think I probably heat embossed with this last time and I did not take that residue off of my stamp. But no worry, because we're using Misty, I can keep that paper tucked right in the corner. I can go ahead and clean off my stamp, and then I can go ahead and ink it up and stamp it back down again. Now you'll see when I start adding in the ink, you really see how the ink is adhering to the stamp. So obviously I had not cleaned it from the last time I used it. So I can go ahead and press that down. I am going to use my little tool here to give me a little bit of extra pressure. And then I can go ahead and lift up my lid. So you'll see here where I have that little slash mark at the top. That's where I'm going to hide it with this top layer. I love this top layer because it kind of reminds me of like maybe paint running down an ornament. Like if you like dip your ornament in paint and then it's just running down. I love the design of this. I do want to heat emboss this because if you look at the color palette today, we do have a little bit of gold. So this is where my gold factor is going to come in. So I have my clear embossing ink, and I did make sure to use my powder tool on the paper before I stamped it down, just to make sure that I don't have any residue of the gold embossing powder sticking to my paper. Because this is a solid image, I am going to double stamp this as well, just to make sure that I get a good impression before I bring in that embossing powder. I can go ahead and press that down. And now I know I'm going to have full coverage because I can actually see it now. I am using just some gold embossing powder. This is Altenew gold embossing powder. And I just sprinkle some of that onto the top of my ornament. Then I can tap off the excess and bring in my heat gun. Now I did have my heat gun heating up off to the side, getting nice and hot. So when I brought this to my paper, I'm going to be able to melt that embossing powder rather quickly. And I do like to go front to back on this just to make sure that I get even heat distribution. And look how gorgeous that gold is. And you never see the slash that I had in the previous stamping of that solid image of the ornament. Brilliant, right? Now I want to come in and I want to add a topper to this. Now within the kit, there's several little toppers that you can put on, and you can put them on separately if you wanted to, but I'm just going to attach mine right to the top. Now, like I said, you can stamp this off to the side and maybe pop up your topper. In my case, I just want it to be one solid image or one solid ornament. So I'm just going to place it right on top. I am going to make sure to heat emboss this in gold as well. Just keeping up with that gold theme. Now, if you didn't want gold, you could totally do this in one of the pink colors that we had. But if you are going to do that, I would suggest stamping it separately because we have that gold embossing. Some of the pink might not stick to your embossing. So I would suggest stamping it separately and then gluing those two pieces together. Since my heat tool is really hot, this is going to melt in no time. Again, I do front and back just to make sure that it keeps the paper from warping as much and it gets a good heat distribution. Now there is a matching die to this, but the die is separate. The top piece is separate from the ornament itself. So I'm just going to fussy cut this, and I'm doing that really because I don't want to have that white border. So I'm trimming right along that ornament. Next, I can use the card panel. And I remember when I was creating this card panel, my paper was a lot bigger than what I needed. So now I can go ahead and trim that down. I have this beautiful design for my ornament. Look how gorgeous. Now I just do want to bring in a tad bit more gold on this. So I'm going to do a little bit of splattering. And I brought in my gold Finetec. And I'm just going to select the gold that is closer to the gold of the embossing, just to kind of keep everything relevant and keeping my metallics the same color. I did put a little bit of water into my little pan, and I'm just making sure that I have a good ratio of water to watercolor. So you see I'm swirling my brush in there, and I'm going to start tapping it off in the lid. And this is when I realized I have a little bit too much water. So in order to fix that, I just bring in a paper towel and I just kind of touch it to the water, and that's going to pull back some of that water for me. So I can like suck up that water, and now when I start mixing, it's going to be thicker, and that's going to be the consistency that I want. So can you see that it's a lot thicker? And before I start splattering this, I do want to bring in my splatter box, because otherwise I'm going to get this beautiful gold all over my desktop, and I just don't need that today. So I'm going to leave my ornament on there as well, because I do want to get some of that gold splatter onto my ornament. Now look how we've pulled in that color combination. Absolutely love it. I went ahead and placed this onto a white card base, and I did stamp out one of the sentiments from the lovely ornament, and I used the gold as well, the gold embossing powder. And what I did was I just took some of that ink, put it onto some white cardstock, and that's how I got that pretty purple. So everything matches. I'll use a skinny piece of foam tape, because I just want this to be a little bit of a pop on my card. So I'll place that right on the bottom of that ornament. And what a beautiful, clean card. It doesn't have a lot of white space, but it is a very clean design. Absolutely love this. Now you could, if you wanted to, you could put some ribbon. I'm just deciding not to do that today. Now let me also show you this color palette in another card. So we have the card we already did, but I also have this one here. This is also another stamp set from Altenew, and I'll have that linked over on my blog. All right, everybody, that is day 3. I will see you guys back here for day 4 in a couple days. Until then, take care.